My name is Emma Carter. I'm 28 years old. And for 3 years, my parents made sure that no one would ever hire me. Every time I applied for a job, they called the employer first. They told them I had a criminal record. Theft. Fraud. Sometimes even assault. None of it was true. I had never been arrested in my life. I had never even gotten a parking ticket. But by the time I turned 27, I was sleeping in a homeless shelter and washing my hair in gas station bathrooms. Not because I was lazy. Not because I wasn't trying. But because in my entire town, nobody believed I was innocent. Every week my father sent the same message. Come home. Apologize. Maybe I'll stop. For a long time I thought leaving my parents' house was the hardest thing I'd ever do. I was wrong. The hardest thing was realizing my parents never wanted me to leave at all. I grew up in a small town called Millbrook. The kind of town where everyone knows your parents before they know you. One grocery store. One high school. One diner that had the same menu for 20 years. People trusted each other there. Which meant they trusted my parents. My father, Richard Carter, worked as a supervisor at the local manufacturing plant. My mother, Linda Carter, volunteered at church and organized charity events. To the town, they were kind and respectable people. But inside our house, things were different. I didn't have my own house key until I was 19. My parents controlled where I went, who I talked to, and how late I stayed out. Even after I started working, every paycheck I earned went into a bank account my mother controlled. It's easier this way, she always told me. We'll keep your money safe until you really need it. I believed her. Back then, I believed everything they said. I started working when I was 14. After school I cleaned tables at the Silver Maple Diner. The work was exhausting. My hands constantly smelled like dish soap and grease. But I didn't complain. Because every time I handed my paycheck to my mother, she smiled proudly. See, she would say to my father, our daughter knows how to work. At school, I studied hard. Really hard. By senior year I had the highest grades in my class. One afternoon my guidance counselor, Mrs. Harper, called me into her office. She slid several college brochures across her desk. Emma, she said gently, with your grades, you could get scholarships. Real universities. You shouldn't stay here if you don't want to. I took the brochures home that evening. I placed them carefully on the kitchen counter. My father barely glanced at them. College is a waste of time, he said while flipping through the newspaper. My mother nodded in agreement. You're better off staying close to family. That was the end of the conversation. And just like that, my future disappeared before it even started. The change didn't come from a huge argument or dramatic moment. It came from something small. I was 25 years old, standing in the kitchen washing dishes after dinner. The same kitchen. The same sink. The same routine I'd had since I was a teenager. Suddenly a thought entered my mind. If I stay here, nothing in my life will ever change. I imagined myself 10 years later. 35 years old. Still living in my parents' house. Still asking permission to leave. Still handing my paychecks to my mother. The idea made my chest tighten. The next morning I walked to the town library. The computers were old and slow. But I sat down and created something I had never had before. My own email account. Not the family one my mother checked. My own private one. Then I searched for jobs outside Millbrook. After an hour of scrolling, I found one. A hardware store 20 miles away needed a sales assistant. Full-time. Benefits after 3 months. My heart pounded while I typed my application. Before I could change my mind, I clicked send. 2 days later, I got a reply. Interview Thursday at 10 a.m. For the first time in years, I felt something I had almost forgotten. Hope. The hardware store manager was a middle-aged man named Tom Bradley. He greeted me politely and asked me to sit in his office. At first the interview seemed normal. He asked about my work experience, my availability, my skills. Then his expression suddenly changed. He leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "Emma," he said carefully, "I want to ask you something directly." My stomach tightened. "Of course," I replied. "We received a phone call yesterday." "A phone call?" He nodded slowly. "The person claimed you have a criminal record." My heart nearly stopped. "What?" I whispered. "They said you were involved in theft and fraud." "That's not true," I said immediately. "I've never been arrested. Ever." Tom studied my face for a long moment. For a second, I thought he believed me. Then he sighed. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "but I can't take that risk." The interview was over. Just like that. Over the next month, the same thing happened again and again. A grocery store interview. Cancelled. A warehouse interview. Cancelled. A cafe job. Cancelled. Finally, one manager took pity on me and told me the truth. "Someone keeps calling us," she said softly. "They warn us not to hire you." That night I couldn't sleep. Something felt wrong. So after my parents went to bed, I searched the house. In my mother's desk drawer, I found a small black notebook. When I opened it, my hands began to shake. Inside were 2 columns. One column listed businesses. The other had check marks beside them. Every place I had applied for a job. Every interview I had scheduled. Every opportunity one had tried to create. All marked. All tracked. All sabotaged. At the bottom of the page was a note written, in my mother's handwriting. "Called manager. Problem solved." I suddenly understood everything. The lies. The rejected interviews. The mysterious phone calls. It was never strangers ruining my life. It was my parents. The next morning I placed the notebook on the kitchen table. My mother froze when she saw it. "You went through my things?" she asked. "You ruined my life," I replied. My father calmly took a sip of coffee. "You called my employers," I said. "You told them I was a criminal." My mother burst into tears. "I did it because I love you," she cried. "The world is dangerous. You're not ready to live alone." "I'm 25 years old," I said. My father finally looked up. "If you leave this house," he said coldly, "you leave with nothing." I thought he was bluffing. He wasn't. That night I packed a single backpack. 2 shirts. 1 pair of jeans. My toothbrush. And a photo of my grandmother. When I opened the front door, my mother stood in the hallway. "If you leave," she said, "don't ever come back." My father stood behind her silently. I stepped outside anyway. As soon as I reached the street, I opened my banking app. My balance read $0. Every dollar I had ever earned was gone. And that was the moment I realized something terrifying. My parents hadn't just controlled my life. They had erased it. The first night after leaving my parents' house, I slept in my car. It was an old blue sedan I had bought with money from my diner job years earlier. At least, I thought it was mine. Now I wasn't even sure of that. I parked in the far corner of a supermarket parking lot where the security lights were dim. The seats were stiff and the air smelled faintly like gasoline and fast food wrappers. I pulled my jacket over my chest and tried to sleep. But every sound made me jump. A shopping cart rolling across pavement. A car door slamming. A dog barking somewhere in the distance. For the first time in my life, I was completely alone. And I had no idea what came next. The next morning I drove to the neighboring town of Fairview, hoping distance might make a difference. I found a small cafe that had a now hiring sign taped to the window. My hair was messy, my clothes wrinkled from sleeping in the car, but I forced myself to walk inside. A woman behind the counter looked up. "You here for the job?" she asked. "Yes," I said quickly. She smiled and handed me an application. "Fill this out. The manager will talk to you in a few minutes." Hope flickered again. Maybe this town didn't know my parents. Maybe this time things would be different. 20 minutes later the manager approached. He introduced himself as Kevin and asked a few basic questions. Everything seemed to be going well. Until his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, frowned slightly, and stepped away to answer it. I watched him through the cafe window. He spoke for less than a minute. When he returned, his friendly expression was gone. "I'm sorry," he said, handing back my application. "We've decided to go in another direction." The same words again. The same result. And I suddenly knew what had happened. That afternoon I checked my phone. 3 missed calls. All from my father. A new text message waited underneath. "You won't make it out there. Come home." My stomach twisted. I realized something horrifying. They were watching. Somehow my parents always knew where I applied for work. And they were calling those businesses before anyone had the chance to hire me. 2 days later, things got worse. I returned to the supermarket parking lot where I had been sleeping. But when I turned the key in the ignition, the engine didn't start. Instead, a police officer knocked on my window. Can you step out of the vehicle?" Confused, I climbed out. The officer pointed to the license plate. This car was reported stolen. My heart nearly stopped. "That's impossible," I said. "It's mine." He shook his head. "The registered owner is Richard Carter. My father." Of course. He had bought the car under his name years ago. Which meant legally, it belonged to him. And now he had reported it stolen. Within 10 minutes, a tow truck arrived. As they pulled the car away, I stood on the curb with my backpack and watched the only shelter I had disappear. My phone buzzed again. Another message from my father. "I warned you." By evening, I had nowhere to go. A woman at a gas station noticed me sitting outside and asked if I was okay. When I told her I needed somewhere to stay, she gave me directions to a small homeless shelter on the edge of town. The building was old and grey. Inside, the air smelled like disinfectant and cheap coffee. A tired-looking woman at the front desk introduced herself as Marcy, the night coordinator. "First time here?" she asked. I nodded. She handed me a clipboard. "Fill this out and we'll find you a bed." For the first time in days, someone was being kind to me. But just as I finished the paperwork, the phone at the desk rang. Marcy answered it. I watched her expression change. Her eyebrows slowly pulled together as she listened. After a moment, she glanced at me. Then she turned away and lowered her voice. "Yes. I understand," she said. When she hung up, she looked uncomfortable. "Emma," she said gently, "I need to ask you something." "What is it?" "Do you have a history of violent behavior?" The question hit me like ice water. "No," I said immediately. "Why would you think that?" She hesitated. "Someone called, claiming you attacked a family member and might be dangerous." I felt my chest tighten. "My father," I whispered. Marcy studied my face for a long moment. Finally she sighed. "I don't believe everything people say over the phone," she said. Relief washed through me. "But I need you to understand," she continued, "if there's any trouble here, you'll have to leave. I won't cause any problems, I promised." That night I was given a narrow cot in a crowded room filled with strangers. It wasn't comfortable. But at least it was safe. Over the next few weeks, the pattern continued. Every time I applied for a job, something went wrong. Employers suddenly stopped responding. Interviews were mysteriously cancelled. Once, a manager accidentally mentioned receiving an email warning him about me. The email claimed I had been arrested for fraud. Another lie. But lies spread fast in small towns. Soon I realized something devastating. My parents weren't just making phone calls anymore. They were creating fake records. Fake accusations. Fake warnings. They were slowly destroying my reputation everywhere I went. And there was nothing I could do to stop it. 3 months passed. Winter arrived. The shelter was overcrowded and cold. Some nights I skipped dinner so other people could eat. My clothes were wearing out. My savings were gone. One evening I stood in a gas station bathroom washing my hair in the sink. As I looked at my reflection in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Dark circles under my eyes. Hair tangled and dull. A face that looked older than 28. Tears filled my eyes. For a moment, I almost believed what my parents wanted me to believe. That I was weak. That I couldn't survive without them. That leaving was a mistake. A week later, something unexpected happened. I was sitting in the shelter cafeteria staring at a cup of instant coffee when a woman approached my table. She was in her early 60s with sharp grey eyes and a long wool coat. "Emma Carter?" she asked. I looked up in surprise. "Yes." She pulled out a chair and sat down across from me. "My name is Sarah Bennett," she said. "I'm a private investigator." My heart began to race. "A what?" She reached into her bag and placed a thick folder on the table. "I've been looking for you," she said calmly. "On behalf of your grandmother." My breath caught. My grandmother passed away 10 years ago. Sarah nodded. "Yes," she said quietly. "And before she died, she asked me to do something very important." She slowly opened the folder. Inside were photographs, documents, phone records, and pages of handwritten notes. All of them about my parents. And the lies they had been telling. Sarah looked directly into my eyes. "Emma," she said gently, "your grandmother knew exactly what they were capable of. And she made sure someone was watching." The rain had stopped by the time Emily Carter and Mr. Daniel Brooks stepped out of the small law office. The evening sky over the quiet town was painted in soft shades of orange and purple, but Emily barely noticed. Her hands were still trembling from everything she had heard. For 3 years she had believed she was alone. For 3 years she believed her parents had destroyed her life completely. But now she knew something different. Someone had been watching. Someone had been protecting her. And that someone had been her grandmother. Emily tightened her grip on the brown envelope Daniel had handed her before she left the office. "Don't open it in public," he had said gently. "There's a lot in there." Now she sat on a quiet bench outside the building, the streetlights beginning to flicker on one by one. Slowly, she opened the envelope. Inside were several neatly organized folders. Each one labeled carefully. Her breath caught in her throat. Folder 1, Employer Contact Log. Emily opened it first. Inside were printed phone records and notes. Dozens of pages. Her father's phone number appeared again and again. Next to each call was the name of a company where Emily had applied for a job. Daniel's voice echoed in her mind. 37 confirmed calls to employers. Each page documented exactly what her father had said. "She has a criminal record. She's unstable. She stole money from us. She's dangerous." Emily felt her chest tighten. For years she had wondered why every job interview ended the same way, polite smiles followed by rejection emails. Now she knew. Her father had poisoned every opportunity before she even walked through the door. She closed the folder and reached for the next one. Folder 2, Fabricated Documents. Inside were copies of the fake police reports her parents had sent to employers. Emily stared at them in disbelief. They looked almost real. Official logos. Forged signatures. Detailed accusations. But Daniel had already explained the truth. The investigator had traced the documents to a cheap editing program installed on her father's home computer. It wasn't just cruel. It was illegal. Very illegal. Emily slowly exhaled. For the first time in years, she felt something different from fear. She felt anger. Not the helpless anger she had felt while sleeping in a shelter or washing her hair in a gas station sink. This anger felt powerful, controlled, and deserved. Folder 3, Surveillance Notes. This folder was thicker than the others. Inside were pages from a notebook. Photographs of her father's handwriting. Dates. Phone numbers. Addresses. Each page tracked Emily's movements. Where she worked. Where she applied for jobs. Where she stayed. Even the homeless shelter. Emily's stomach turned. Her father had been watching her like she was an enemy. Not a daughter. An enemy. At the bottom of one page was a note written in dark ink. If she gets stable work, call them immediately. Emily closed the folder slowly. For a moment she simply sat there on the bench, staring at the pavement. 3 years of confusion. 3 years of thinking she was the problem. 3 years of believing the world had rejected her. But the truth was simple. The world had never rejected her. Her parents had sabotaged her. Footsteps approached quietly. Daniel sat beside her on the bench. I figured you might want some company, he said. Emily wiped her eyes quickly. I'm not crying, she muttered. Daniel smiled softly. You're allowed to. She shook her head. No. Not anymore. She held up the folders. They did all of this. Yes, Daniel said. And now we prove it. Emily looked at him carefully. You sound very sure. Daniel leaned back slightly. Because this case is strong. Stronger than you realize. He pointed toward the folders. Defamation. Identity fraud. Harassment. Document forgery. Financial theft. Emily blinked. That's a lot. It is. And that's before we add the trust. Emily hesitated. The trust fund still felt unreal. $340,000, she whispered. Daniel nodded. Your grandmother wanted to make sure you could rebuild your life. Emily looked down at the envelope again. I wish she were here. Daniel's voice softened. She believed in you. That's why she planned all of this. Emily sat quietly for a moment. Then she asked the question that had been sitting in her mind since the meeting ended. What happens next? Daniel smiled slightly. Next. He tapped the envelope. Next we fight back. 2 days later Emily walked into the law office again. This time she wasn't shaking. Daniel and another attorney, a sharp-looking woman named Lisa Grant, sat across from her at the conference table. A large stack of documents sat between them. Lisa adjusted her glasses. Emily, before we proceed, I need to ask you something important. Emily nodded nervously. Okay. Lisa leaned forward. Are you prepared for what happens when we file this lawsuit? Emily frowned. What do you mean? It means your parents will be investigated. Their finances will be examined. Their phone records will be subpoenaed. She paused. And eventually, they will know you're the one who started it. Emily's hands tightened. For a moment the old fear returned. Her father's shouting voice. Her mother's cold silence. The way they had controlled every part of her life. But then she remembered something else. The trust fund. The evidence. Her grandmother's note. Don't use this for revenge. Use it for freedom. Emily slowly lifted her head. I'm not doing this for revenge. Lisa watched her carefully. Then why are you doing it? Emily's voice was calm now. Because they don't get to destroy my life and pretend they're victims. Daniel smiled slightly. Lisa nodded. Good answer. She slid a thick document across the table. Then let's begin. Emily looked down at the first page. At the top, in bold letters, were the words, Carter versus Carter. For the first time in years, Emily felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. 3 weeks later, everything changed. Early one Monday morning, a court officer knocked on the front door of Robert and Linda Carter's house. Robert Carter opened the door with his usual confident smile. Can I help you? The officer handed him a thick envelope. You've been served. Robert frowned. Served? For what? But the officer had already turned and walked away. Robert shut the door and opened the envelope at the kitchen table while Linda watched. At first his expression showed confusion. Then disbelief. Then pure anger. What is it? Linda asked nervously. Robert slammed the papers onto the table. That ungrateful girl is suing us. Linda froze. Emily? Yes, Emily. The documents listed several charges. Defamation. Identity fraud. Harassment. Financial theft. Forgery of legal documents. Linda's hands began to shake as she read the pages. This isn't possible, she whispered. Robert scoffed. She has no proof. She's been homeless for 3 years. But when he flipped to the next section, his confidence cracked. Attached were phone records, emails, audio transcripts, even photos of the notebook he kept tracking Emily's job applications. Linda stared at him. You kept a notebook? Robert snapped. Of course I did. Someone had to keep track of her mistakes. Linda's voice dropped to a whisper. Robert, they have everything. For the first time in years, Robert Carter felt something unfamiliar. Fear. Meanwhile, across town, Emily sat in Daniel Brooks' office watching the local news on a small television. The headline appeared on the screen. Local couple accused of sabotaging daughter's life 4 years. Emily felt her stomach twist. This is happening fast, she said quietly. Daniel nodded. Once a lawsuit is filed, reporters can access the documents. The news anchor continued. Court filings allege the couple contacted more than 30 employers with false claims that their daughter had a criminal record. Emily looked down at her hands. 3 years ago she had been sleeping on a thin mattress in a homeless shelter. Now the entire town was learning the truth. Her phone suddenly buzzed. A text message from someone she hadn't heard from in years. Sarah Mitchell, her old college friend. Emily. I just saw the news. Are you okay? Emily stared at the message for a long moment. Then she typed back. I will be. She put the phone down and looked at Daniel. What happens now? Daniel leaned back in his chair. Now your parents try to defend themselves. And if they can't? Emily asked. Daniel smiled slightly. Then everything they built their reputation on collapses. Emily took a slow breath. For the first time in 3 years, the world was finally hearing her side of the story. And this time, the truth was louder than the lies. Within days, the news spread across the entire town. People who had once believed Robert and Linda Carter began to question everything. Several employers came forward saying they had received strange phone calls about Emily in the past. One restaurant manager even told reporters that a man claiming to be Emily's father warned them she was dangerous. When the recordings from the private investigator became public, the truth was undeniable. For the first time, the town realized Emily had been telling the truth all along. The courtroom was packed on the day of the first hearing. Emily sat beside Daniel Brooks, trying to stay calm. Across the room sat her parents. Robert Carter refused to look at her, while Linda stared down at the table. The judge reviewed the evidence, phone records, forged documents, and investigator reports. Robert's lawyer tried to argue that everything was a misunderstanding. But the evidence was too strong. The judge announced the case would move forward to a full trial. Over the next few weeks, several witnesses testified. Former employers explained how they had rejected Emily after receiving disturbing calls from someone claiming to be her father. A computer expert confirmed that the fake police reports were created on Robert Carter's home computer. Even a former neighbor testified that Robert often bragged about teaching Emily a lesson. Every testimony weakened the Carter family's defense. During the investigation, another shocking discovery was made. Money from Emily's old bank account had been transferred to an account owned by her parents. The amount was nearly $18,000, taken during the years she worked part-time jobs. Robert tried to claim it was family money, but the bank records told a different story. Now the case included financial theft. When Emily was called to testify, the courtroom became completely silent. She spoke calmly about the years of control, the lost jobs, and the nights she spent in a homeless shelter. She described washing her hair in gas station sinks and eating only one meal a day. Some people in the courtroom wiped tears from their eyes. Even the judge looked deeply disturbed by what she had endured. For the first time, Emily felt truly heard. The biggest moment of the trial came when Daniel played an audio recording from the investigator. In the recording, Robert Carter clearly said, "If she ever gets stable work, call them immediately and ruin it." The courtroom erupted in shocked whispers. Robert's lawyer had no response. From that moment, everyone knew the case was over. Several days later, the judge delivered the final decision. Robert and Linda Carter were found liable for defamation, harassment, fraud, financial theft. They were ordered to pay Emily hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages. The judge also referred the forged documents to prosecutors for possible criminal charges. Robert Carter sat silently as the verdict was read. For the first time in his life, he had lost control. Months later, Emily stood outside a small house on the edge of a quiet neighborhood. With help from her grandmother's trust fund and the court settlement, she had finally rebuilt her life. She had a stable job, a safe home, and people who believed her. One evening she opened the final letter from her grandmother. Inside were simple words. "You were always stronger than they believed. Now go live the life they tried to take from you." Emily looked around her new home and smiled. For years she had survived. Now, finally, she was free.